Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Storytelling Edge: How to Transform Your Business, Stop Screaming into the Void, and Make People Love You, by Joe Lazauskas and Shane Snow. Narrated by Chris Sorensen. Introduction. A few years ago, a pale woman with crazy eyebrows and a keytar strapped to her back shot a home video. Standing on a street corner in Melbourne, Australia, at dusk, she wore a kimono and held up Sharpied signs. One by one, the signs flipped. They explained that the woman had spent the past 4 years writing songs. She was a musician. She had parted ways with her record label, which wanted to charge an outrageous amount to produce her next album. She and her bandmates were happy to no longer be with the label, and they had worked hard to create some great new music and art. But they couldn't finish producing the record on their own. If their new business, independent music, was going to get off the ground, they needed people's help. "This is the future of music," one of her signs read. Another, "I love you." Then she posted the video on the crowdfunding website Kickstarter. In 30 days, the video raised $1.2 million, more than 10 times her goal. Nearly 25,000 people pre-ordered the album, bought artwork, or simply donated money. The album and tour became a huge success, and the artist turned her music into a profitable business. The woman in the kimono was named Amanda Palmer. She changed the game for independent musicians with that campaign, and she didn't do it by asking for money. She did it by telling her story. Stories matter. Every few minutes, a new buzzword rips through the business world, gets a bunch of blog posts written about it, and ends up in a pile of tired terms next to synergy. Today, one of the biggest corporate buzzwords is storytelling. Marketers are obsessed with storytelling. Conference panels on the subject have fewer empty seats than Hamilton on Broadway. Funny thing is, storytelling has been the buzzword off and on since the advent of advertising. It keeps rising to the top of the pile because it's timeless. Stories have driven human behavior throughout history, for good and for ill. And in the digital age, businesses, workers, and leaders have more opportunities than ever to stand out, spread their message, and spark change through stories. Good stories surprise us. They make us think and feel. They stick in our minds and help us remember ideas and concepts in a way that a PowerPoint crammed with bar graphs never can. Stories are the reason thousands of creators like Amanda Palmer have rallied the support of millions on Kickstarter, and Kickstarter knows this. It doesn't just allow creators to tell their story, it requires it. Every project must have a video in which the creators explain what they're doing and why they need help. As internet, mobile messaging, and sharing tools transform our lives, storytelling is becoming an essential skill in any job. As we spend more and more time consuming information by the streamful, storytelling is a core skill that every business and individual will need to master. Unfortunately, in the era of PowerPoints and status updates, many of us have forgotten how to tell a good story. Businesses need to tell good stories. Recent research indicates that 78% of chief marketing officers at big companies think that content, which is to say information, entertainment, education, and in an ideal world comes in the form of or is a piece of a story, is the future of their job. 2/3 of brand marketers think that content is better than most types of advertising. That's huge. This is largely because social media has gotten us comfortable conversing with anyone and any company. It's now commonplace to find brand content in our Facebook streams next to pictures of our loved ones and stories from the New York Times. As the majority of corporations present themselves as publishers, the defining characteristic of success will be the ability to not only put things on the internet, but also craft compelling stories. The fact is, no one really loves being interrupted with a sales pitch. But everyone likes a good story. The businesses that can tell a good story today, and there are some really good ones right now, will have an advantage tomorrow. Workers and leaders need to tell good stories. All things being equal, people with powerful personal brands, that is, great reputations, have a leg up on getting jobs and being promoted to leadership roles. And personal brands are built on the stories we tell and the stories that are told about us. Stories make presentations better. Stories make ideas stick. Stories help us persuade people. Savvy leaders tell stories to inspire and motivate us. That's why so many politicians tell stories in their speeches, and many have backgrounds as authors and entertainers. And like Amanda Palmer's story endeared her to tens of thousands of strangers, our own stories can help us build our businesses and careers too. Sure, we need science and data to make the right decisions in life and work, but the best business books and keynote speakers use stories to help us remember their ideas even when their stat slides fade from our memory. Who are we? We're two journalists who care a lot about storytelling and what it means for the future of business. Shane graduated from Columbia Journalism School when the media world was in crisis. Thanks to the fast-changing economics of media and the greatest recession in a century, newspapers and magazines were hemorrhaging jobs at a historic rate. Shane saw his talented classmates face dwindling full-time job prospects and struggle to even find decent freelance work. At the same time, after years of hustling as a freelance journalist himself, Joe was trying to keep his digital news startup, The Faster Times, afloat despite fast-falling advertising rates. Both of us saw the same opportunity. Social media was completely changing the dynamics of marketing and advertising for businesses. It allowed brands to reach people directly like never before. To capitalize on that opportunity, brands would need something they didn't have: great storytellers. So, in 2010, Shane teamed up with his childhood friend from Idaho, an internet entrepreneur named Joe Coleman, and an engineer buddy named Dave Goldberg to create Contently, which helped broker gigs for freelance journalists to write blogs and social media content for brands. Simultaneously, Joe was building his own network of writers and helping brands get content programs off the ground. A little over a year later, we joined forces, and Joe became Contently's editor-in-chief. Contently grew into a thriving technology company with a suite of software that helps Fortune 500 companies and others to create, manage, and optimize content to build relationships with employees and customers. We wanted to give brands the tools to tell stories that people love, and measure the impact those stories had on their bottom line, what we call engaging and accountable content. Contently became the preeminent technology company in the emerging field of content marketing, and our blog, The Content Strategist, became the daily news of the content industry with millions of readers. As Shane likes to say, we were in the water when a huge wave came, and we surfed it. We are fundamentally nerds. In our years together at Contently, we've become obsessed with not only the art of storytelling for business, but also the psychology and neuroscience of how stories actually transform human relationships. That obsession produced this audiobook. Throughout the audiobook, we're going to speak in the first person a lot. Some of the stories we share happen to one of us or the other. Most of the time, though, we're just going to use the royal we for simplicity. If it helps, you can imagine that we're wearing a gigantic shirt with two heads coming out of it. This is actually what we are doing right now. It's part of our creative process. Don't judge. Why this audiobook? If you're listening to this audiobook, you've probably heard of content marketing, brand publishing, brand storytelling, or one of its many euphemisms. The internet has a glut of content about content. There's plenty of people preaching that we should do storytelling for marketing. The thing we found, though, is that there is a distinct lack of material on what we think is the most important part. How does great storytelling actually work? And how can a business actually get better at it? At Contently, we preach that content is more than a marketing tactic. We believe that great stories are the secret weapon that can make every part of a business better. Storytelling helps people remember you. It gives businesses an edge when it comes to hiring. It helps salespeople get indoors, bolsters a company's reputation, and can help everyone within an organization be more connected and informed. We believe that weaving stories into our products, services, presentations, and habits can change everything about how we work, live, and do business. In this audiobook, we'll show how to make all that happen. There's a Native American proverb on our office wall that says, "Those who tell the stories rule the world." As technology increasingly intertwines us, we believe that's increasingly true. It's our job as businesses, workers, and leaders to make sure the good guys are the ones telling the best stories. As Amanda Palmer might write with her Sharpie, this is the future of business. We love you, and we want to give you an edge. Chapter 1. The Power of Story. Pretend that the world decided to elect a queen. The candidates have been whittled down to two well-known British women, Queen Elizabeth and J.K. Rowling, author of the Harry Potter series. You have been asked to vote in this election based on who you trust more. Who would you vote for, and why? A couple of years ago, we were curious about this, so we took a geeky route and asked 3,000 Americans this question. The results of our election might surprise you. Rowling, the children's book author, beat Elizabeth the monarch by what pollsters call a landslide. But why? Why would we be more likely to trust the author over the queen? Why would we choose the storyteller over the woman with a lifetime of leadership experience? And what does this have to do with the business world? In this audiobook, we're going to answer those questions. First, we'll dig into the science of story and what stories do to our brains. Then we'll get into how we can become more powerful storytellers ourselves and how to use storytelling as a strategy to persuade and present more effectively at work, grow our businesses, and make a difference in the world. And as you might have guessed, we're going to start with a couple of stories. Jacques and the Beggar. Many years ago, a French poet named Jacques Prévert was walking down the street. He passed a beggar asking for money. For whatever reason, Jacques decided to stop and talk to the man. "How's it going?" Jacques asked. As the beggar turned, Jacques noticed that he was blind. In fact, he had a sign that said so. The beggar replied, "It's not going very well. People walk by and they don't leave any money in my hat. Would you give me some money?" "I'm a poor writer," Jacques said. "I have no money. But perhaps I could rewrite your sign for you." "By all means," said the beggar. He had nothing to lose. So Jacques took the sign, flipped it over, and wrote a new message. And then he went about his day. A few days later, Jacques was walking along the same path, came across the same beggar, and decided to ask the same question. "How's it going?" This time the beggar's tune had changed. "People have been so generous lately," he said. "My hat fills up 3 times a day. Thank you. Thank you for what you wrote on my sign." Here's what Jacques had written. "Spring is coming, but I won't see it." With one sentence, Jacques transformed a statement into a story. In a single line, he changed a man's life. Now, keep that story in the back of your mind while we tell you one of Shane's favorite stories in the world. And now for Shane's favorite Ryan Gosling story. Ryan Gosling is an actor. He's pretty. For a long time, Shane didn't care about him at all. Sure, he seemed like a good actor. But Shane never saw the notebook, which the whole world adored. He knew there was a bizarre amount of internet meme activity around Gosling, but, whatever. He was okay. Then one day Shane was sitting in the audience of a business conference. Some guy was giving a terribly dull presentation, one of those talks where there are about 250 words of tiny text crammed onto every single slide. Shane ran out of emails to answer, so he began browsing Wikipedia. We don't quite know how, but at some point he ended up on the entry for Ryan Gosling, and for whatever reason he decided to go ahead and read it. Don't judge. As we said, the presentation was really boring. Here's the gist of Ryan's story according to the editors at Wikipedia. Gosling had a bit of a sad childhood. He grew up in Canada. That was not the sad part. His dad was a traveling salesman, so his family moved a lot. When he was young, his parents split up. He ended up living with his mom, who worked full-time. All the moving and family trouble affected him. He had a hard time making friends. He didn't learn to read until far later than most kids, nearly into his teens. He was diagnosed with ADHD. Watching television became Gosling's favorite hobby. He loved movies and accents. He loved the Mickey Mouse Club. He loved Marlon Brando. But he was bullied at school. Moving around and watching a lot of TV probably didn't help him make friends. Things came to a head one day at school when he brought knives to primary school and threw them at the kids who bullied him. He'd decided to take matters into his own hands like his action film hero Rambo. Around age 12, Gosling begged his mom to let him go to an audition for the Mickey Mouse Club in Montreal. He was a cute, talented kid, and he got the part. Now, here's the crazy part of the story. Because his mother couldn't move to Orlando with him, Gosling got adopted by none other than Justin Timberlake's mom. Or rather, she became his legal guardian. He learned how to perform on the Mickey Mouse Club. He learned to read well. He learned to focus. He grew up. And he became Ryan Gosling. And then something strange happened. After reading this Wikipedia entry, Shane suddenly wanted to watch some Ryan Gosling movies. So he went and watched The Notebook. Turns out it's fantastic. The next time a Gosling movie was in the theater, Shane watched it. He started telling people about how cool Ryan Gosling was, how human he was. It wasn't long before people started introducing him as, "This is Shane. He founded Contently, and he's a huge Ryan Gosling fan." And it was true. 10 minutes on Wikipedia had turned him from apathetic to advocate. He's on Team Gosling, and he's on it simply because he learned his story. As weird as it sounds, Shane feels like he has a relationship with Ryan. We learned a couple of things from these two stories. First, stories are powerful. Both Jacques' experience with the blind man and Shane's with Ryan Gosling show this. They illustrate what great stories fundamentally do. They build relationships, and they make people care. People didn't care much about the blind man when he asked for money, but when he helped people understand what it was like to be in his shoes, when he shared his story, they were moved to help him. Shane didn't care about Ryan Gosling. Now he refers to him by his first name. If they ever meet, he's going to give Ryan a hug. But we bet Ryan's used to that sort of thing by now. This power of stories to change our minds, to build relationships and make people care is more than just neat. It's scientific. A few years ago, a group of researchers from University of Pennsylvania gave $5 to random people and asked them to read different letters from charities asking for money. When the plea for donations relied on statistics and talked about widespread problems, people donated less. When the request involved a story of an individual in pain, people donated more. Versions of this experiment have been repeated dozens of times using television commercials, brochures, and in-person persuasion. The result is always the same. A plea for help will get some donations, but a story always gets more. That's because our brains are built for story. In the classic tale, In the Heart of the Sea, The Tragedy of the Whale Ship Essex by Nathaniel Philbrick, a group of sailors were zagging off the coast of South America in 1821 when they came across something ghastly. They were in a whaling ship named the Dauphin, under the command of a captain named Zimri Coffin. One day on the horizon, a small boat popped into view in the middle of the ocean. Here's an account of what the Dauphin crew saw. Under Coffin's watchful eye, the helmsman brought the ship as close as possible to the derelict craft. Even though their momentum quickly swept them past it, the brief seconds during which the ship loomed over the open boat presented a sight that would stay with the crew the rest of their lives. First, they saw bone, human bones, littering the thwarts and floorboards, as if the whaleboat were the seagoing lair of a ferocious man-eating beast. Then they saw the two men. They were curled up in opposite ends of the boat, their skin covered with sores, their eyes bulging from the hollows of their skulls, their beards caked with salt and blood. They were sucking the marrow from the bones of their dead shipmates. Quick, think about where you were when you just heard that. Do you recall how the seat you were sitting in felt as you pictured the salt-caked beards of the cannibal shipmates? Did someone in the room with you happen to cough while you heard this? Do you recall any background noises outside? Any trucks or sirens? By the time you finished that passage, chances are your brain had pulled you into the story. Your imagination filled in the scene and your present circumstances faded into the background of your consciousness. This is what Jonathan Gottschall, who shares this anecdote in his wonderful book, The Storytelling Animal, calls the witchery of story. It's what our brains have been biologically programmed to do. We are hardwired to dramatize, to imagine, and to be pulled into good stories. Think about the last time you watched a movie or read a book and were suddenly snapped back to reality by a noise in the room. You hadn't realized that you'd lost awareness of your surroundings. You didn't notice when the line between reality and the story world inside your brain began to fade. That process, which we go through every night while we sleep, is a survival mechanism that helps us do a better job of storing information in our memory. Stories help us remember. We also know the areas of your brain that light up when you hear or see a story. Motor cortex, emotion processing, imagining sensations, emotional reactions, visual image processing. It turns out that something surprising happens when information comes via a story than via simple facts. More of our brains light up. When we hear a story, the neural activity increases fivefold, like a switchboard has suddenly illuminated the city of our mind. Scientists have a saying, neurons that fire together wire together. When more of your brain is at work at a given point of time, the chances that your brain will remember the work it did increases exponentially. Pretend, for example, you are in high school health class and your teacher is giving a slideshow presentation. The first slide features a chart filled with stats on how many people die or are ruined every year from drug use. The teacher says, "Drugs are dangerous." In this moment, the areas of your brain responsible for language processing and comprehension will be working to absorb this information. Now, say that instead you have a substitute teacher who takes a different approach. She puts up a slide with a photograph of a handsome teenager. "This is Johnny," she says. "He was a good kid, but he had a lot of family problems that made it hard to be happy some days. He was quiet and got picked on a lot. So he started hanging out with some of the other picked-on kids. One day, one of them offered him drugs. He started doing lots of drugs to make himself feel better. 10 years later, he looked like this." Cut to a photograph of a sickly-looking mid-20s young man with missing teeth. And then the teacher gives the same message as the first. drugs are dangerous. During this lecture, all sorts of areas of your brain will be active. Areas that help you imagine what Johnny's life is like, how he feels, how you might feel some of the same things. Unsurprisingly, the second kind of presentation, the story, is a lot more memorable. Students who see that presentation are going to be more likely to think about Johnny next time someone offers them drugs. No matter what choice they make, they are more likely to remember the message that drugs are dangerous. Do you see where we're going? When we get information through stories, we engage more neurons. As a result, the story is wired into our memory much more reliably. Imagine how this could change your next presentation. Stories generate empathy at the chemical level. A few years ago, scientists packed a bunch of people into a movie theater to see exactly how stories work on our brains. They put helmets on the participants' heads, strapped on monitors to measure their heart rate and breathing, and taped perspiration trackers onto their bodies. The participants looked around nervously, laughed as they made small talk, and fiddled with their helmet straps. And then a James Bond movie began. As the movie played, the scientists closely monitored the audience's physiological reaction. When James Bond found himself in stressful situations, like hanging from a cliff or fighting a bad guy, the audience's pulses raced. They sweated. Their attention focused. And something else interesting happened. At the same time, their brains synthesized a neurochemical called oxytocin. Oxytocin is our empathy drug. It sends us a signal that we should care about someone. In prehistoric times, this was useful for figuring out if a person that was approaching you was safe. Were they a friend, or were they going to club you on the head and steal your woolly mammoth steak? Through oxytocin, our brains helped us identify tribe members whom we should help survive, because that would help us survive too. Our heart rates rise when James Bond is in danger because our brains have decided that he, this familiar character, is part of our tribe. We generate oxytocin when we see him, which makes us empathize with his story when we watch it. And circularly, the more of his story we experience, the more oxytocin our brain secretes. That means that we're not just watching James Bond. We're putting ourselves in his shoes. At the deepest physiological level, it means that we really care. Oxytocin levels can actually predict how much empathy people will have for someone else. And, fun fact, there's actually now such a thing as synthetic oxytocin. You can shoot it into your nose like Flonase. One of the first things scientists did with this, of course, was to make people snort oxytocin and then ask them to give money to charity. Perhaps you won't be surprised to learn that, compared to regular people, oxytocin snorters were more charitable. Maybe some drugs aren't so bad. Stories bring us together. It's hard to learn someone's story and not feel connected to them. The oxytocin we get from stories helps us care whether we like it or not. This is basically the premise of the film The Breakfast Club. A group of misfits is forced to come together for detention one Saturday. After sitting miserably for a while, hating each other, they start to share stories about their personal lives, their parents, and, of course, their dreams. Over the course of the movie, they form a bond. When they leave detention and go back to their different worlds, they remain closer than before. They aren't necessarily going to be best friends, but they now understand and respect one another. You can imagine them standing up for one another against a bully or becoming close friends after high school when the artificial boundaries of their clique start to disintegrate. But even more interesting, we don't even need to share our own stories to build a relationship with someone. Sharing almost any story makes a difference. In a 2011 research study in New Zealand published in the Journal of Teaching and Teacher Education, researchers put kids from different racial and economic backgrounds together for a series of storytime activities. The scientists found that even when the kids weren't sharing their own stories,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?